Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, college football fans across the nation and around the world, around this COVID spiking world. This is Tim May with the Tim May Podcast. And as always, I'm joined by Awesome. You know him as Austin Ward. That is, if you're his mom and dad, I know him as Awesome Ward. Awesome, welcome to the Tim May Podcast yet again.
Thanks, Tim. Starting to feel like some of those ones we did in March and April, just a somber mood. I thought we'd be past this, but as we've talked about before a number of times, this thing can come and bite you at any time.
Yes, it can. And just when you think you got the door shut, you know what I mean? Maybe you needed a little bit more insulation around that door to keep it out. And I think Ohio State figured that out, found that out this past week, and with having to cancel their trip to Illinois. And as you and I were talking before we went on, started recording this podcast, good chance they canceled that trip. They were red in one area, orange in the other, which gave them the ability under the Big Ten protocol set about by dealing with COVID-19 to cancel that trip to Illinois, and basically with the idea of saving maybe the last 3 weekends of their season. As Gene Smith said, the number one challenge this week, they're not looking past Michigan State from the standpoint. Definitely shouldn't look past them as a team, but not looking past the game against Michigan State. That's what their focus is on, is trying to get to that game, get that game in, and then move on from there. And the way I understand it, they've got a decent shot at that. And this is just stuff I've collected over the weekend. I wanted to share on the podcast because this podcast kind of stays up all week, and we record it on Monday mornings. But in essence, Ohio State's challenge is pretty much to be COVID-19 free in terms of new positive tests over 3 tests this week. And one was Sunday. The way I understand it, there's a good chance they had 0 positives from that test. They'll do another one Tuesday. And if they get one done Tuesday, there's a good chance they can even work out, I think, Tuesday afternoon. Whether they'll practice or not, remains to be seen. I'm not sure whether they could work out. Obviously, the Woody Hayes Athletic Center, they shut that down for a little while. We'll see when that opens. But and then if they can get a third test in with zeros, or they might have wiggle room for one more new positive test, because it's based on, it's a sliding scale based on a certain amount of time. It's not just you get a clean slate on Sunday, and start testing again, as you will know, because of the contact tracing and everything else. But there's a very good chance they'll get to play at Michigan State if they can, I think, get through 3 tests this week with zeros, or possibly one more. Is that the way you understand it also?
Yeah, and I think that was the logic that they were using to shut down that trip to Illinois. Because if you popped one more trying to play that game, and I hate to make it sound like that or so cavalier, I don't mean it that way, but if somebody got on that plane and just one more person, 2 more people got it, and then you're red, Ohio State would have been forced to shut down according to that Big Ten guidelines for 7 days, which would have, you would have got the Illinois game, but you wouldn't have been able to play at all against Michigan State. And suddenly, depending on how widely spread it was, then you're putting the game in jeopardy on December 12th. So the trade for 1 for 2 is maybe with an eye on that minimum games requirement, but also obviously health and safety and making sure that nobody else got infected. And the way that Ohio State has approached this with trying to get them back to play and open up the Woody, what you said, you have to have a couple days of zeros. It's that 7-day rolling average. Whether they would go right back into a full practice on Tuesday afternoon, that may not be the case. And Ryan Day said that he only really would want his team to have a minimum of 1 full padded practice, and he would be comfortable with that happening on Thursday. So, we'll see exactly what happens, because so much of this is pointless to predict. We can't, as it's been demonstrated, we can't control or predict what's going to happen with any accuracy once that virus gets a hold of a team or a roster or a facility. So it's that's cliche that we all hate about day to day is really extremely accurate in this situation.
And by the way, I wanted to let people know I've got a special guest coming up on this program in a little while. Jack Ebling from basically has covered Michigan State and everything to do with Michigan State for like 4 or 5 decades. he's got me as a radio host up there. Great show up there that I've been on quite a few times out of East Lansing, out of the Lansing area. He's going to be on. We're going to be talking about all kinds of things, including the impact, you know, for Michigan State, the way Michigan State has basically been a little bit of a surprise this year, et cetera, but also, his view of Ohio State and the challenge Ohio State is dealing with, et cetera, and also the challenge Michigan's dealing with, and Penn State, just kind of a look at the Big Ten as a whole. But the interesting thing is, like you just said, Ohio State's challenge is to try to get to that game on Saturday at Michigan State, and we well know, Ohio State has requested and kind of forcefully requested that we not reveal names of people who have tested positive. You pretty much have to wait until Saturday to find out who has had a positive test, because it will be obvious. I think there will be some players missing from the starting lineup, and of course that's a 21-day sentence, for want of another term, based on the Big Ten protocols of when and where you test positive. But there could be a few starters missing, the way I understand it. We'll see how that goes. But the bottom line is, if they get to the zeros of these first 3 days of testing this week, there's a great chance they're still going to be able to play out at second and third teams to still beat everybody in the Big Ten. But there's a good chance it could beat a lot of everybody's and a lot of the anybody's. And so we'll see how that goes this week. But back to what we were talking about, Ryan Day, you can just tell by the tone of his voice on Saturday when we had that Zoom conference call with him. He's really bummed out, man, that all the effort he has put into this, his staff has put into this, et cetera. COVID still slipped in through the cracks, so to speak. I mean, I'm not sure they ever figured out exactly, who the typhoid Terry was, so to speak, in this deal. But it's kind of a bummer to him, especially for him. I mean, he sacrificed a lot, staying away from his family almost the entire fall, et cetera, and yet he comes down with it. So you could just tell by the tone of his voice, he felt like he'd taken a loss, right?
Yeah, and there are theories within the program and outside of the program about where that started. It really doesn't matter. You'd hate to point the blame for any one slip anywhere, but this tells you how tenuous the whole thing is, because Ohio State and Alabama, I mean, both. There's no way you could convince me that after all the sacrifices, the attention to detail from those two people, Ryan Day and Nick Saban, that they were not doing everything possible for their team. But they are one person. They are at the top, but they're at one out of 170. And, everybody has to remain vigilant. Josh Myers had just talked about this last week, that, he hadn't gone to the grocery store. He hadn't been anywhere but his apartment in the Woody or the Horseshoe or Penn State, since whenever, August, because any exposure outside of those places put him at risk. And, that's hard to do. Like, think about all of us living our lives, a grocery store for one, but, trying to do our jobs and, go to Roosters on Monday, and they make sure that you're always wearing masks. It's hard. Like, we're all tired of it. We've been doing it since March, and I get it, the frustration, but, now you see how much that was weighing on Ryan Day, because so many people had made so many sacrifices for so long, dating back to June when they were allowed to come back to campus, and they'd had that one, pause where they had to shut things down. I think that was the first week of July. Then since then, staying at basically 0%. Now, that doesn't mean they had no positive tests. I think that was sort of a, clever wording there to avoid it. 0% does not mean they had zero positive tests, but, it's even when they had an issue or two pop up, they had reacted so quickly with their daily testing, with, their response with isolation. They had felt great about what they were doing to keep it under control. And then after all that, you get to, Thanksgiving week and a holiday and really towards the stretch run of the season. And then it pops up again. And, once it's in, it's hard to to build a new barricade once it gets there. So you could tell that not only was Ryan Day disappointed just for that one weekend, and obviously he got it himself and wanted to stay healthy, wants all of his team to be healthy, but, I think the uncertainty of what would come next. Can you make sure that you're able to get back on the field this year, or that nobody needs serious – again, I'm trying to put this in context of we understand that he wants everybody healthy, but just from the football side, how do you even proceed from that once it's in and you have no concrete answer? You just don't know what's going to happen, and that makes it doubly frustrating, especially after everything they'd been through.
Yeah, absolutely. And Ryan Day himself, I think he faces a 10-day, I think, minimum quarantine, right? I mean, before he's allowed to rejoin the team in a tactical manner or strategic manner.
Yeah, next Tuesday is my understanding.
Yeah, and several other there's a good chance several assistant coaches also are dealing with this. We've been given no numbers by Ohio State in that regard. The only way we know it's at least 13 or 14 is just based on the fact they had the red flag, on the one statistical category of tier 1, what they call tier 1 personnel for the football program, which is basically 170 people. 13 or 14 clearly must have tested positive over that 7-day span, and that's why that caused the step back. The interesting thing from here is I've been saying this all along, and how, especially when you're on talk radio shows or television shows, they're always looking for definitive answers for ether, in my opinion, or cloud questions, meaning, well, can they still get into the college football playoff with 5 or 6 wins? Who knows, right? That's what I keep saying. I've been telling people this 2 months ago that no one's going to play, I don't think, a complete schedule. Just because you've rescheduled games in the SEC, for example, pushed them back, doesn't mean they're going to get played. The problem, of course, with the Big Ten is it left itself no buffer zone to absorb. And I talk about that with Jack Ebling later, but because he's been around the Big Ten for a long time, and this is the problem that the Big Ten, the corner it painted itself into, because it had a great schedule to begin with to deal with these kind of challenges, but then backed away from it. And then now it came out with 9 games, in essence, including the plus game, in 9 weeks. That was never going to work on a full basis for everybody, just based on statistical probabilities. And so, but here's my take on that right up front is, I think, I still believe if Ohio State gets to 7-0, which is still a possibility, it's in the college football playoff. I really think if it gets to 6-0, it's in the college football playoff now, based on the way things are happening. We're going to know more when the latest college football playoff rankings come out on Tuesday night, whether Ohio State loses ground. Obviously, it was number 4 last week. Clemson, I'm sure, solidified its number 3 ranking the way it played over the weekend. But whether the college football playoffs committee still sees Ohio State as truly viable, we're going to know on Tuesday night. Don't you agree?
Yeah, and it's hard to know what really would have changed between last Tuesday and this Tuesday because
Ohio State didn't get to play a game.
Yeah, but like, did the committee need to see them beat Illinois without Ryan Day? Like, they have all these eye test things that they use and excuses they'll make. With Trevor Lawrence didn't play or somebody was hurt in this game. Like, Ryan Day wasn't going to coach and they were going to play Illinois. Like, I'm not sure that game really should have tip the scales one way or another. So,
let me interrupt you though. But Ohio State was going to be led by Larry Bombs Away Johnson, so I see what you're talking about. I was so looking forward to seeing how that whole machinery was going to work without Ryan Day calling plays. But go ahead, you're right.
Yeah, and hopefully, knock on wood, we get to see that on Saturday anyway against Michigan State. We'll see how that works out. But that's the part that is just silly to me with the way that this committee operates and the way that from one week to another what they could evaluate could be completely different. I don't see how you could have put any stock in what happened against Illinois no matter what, and giving them even just put one more win in the win column. I never understand why that matters. If they
here's why it matters. Let me interrupt you though, because it's not necessarily your fault. It's not Ohio State's fault it didn't get to play Maryland. But you can assign Ohio State fault for the fact it didn't get to play Illinois. But with COVID-19, I don't know how you can assign fault. You know what I mean, one way or the other. But the bottom line is, I think Oregon has now played as many games as Ohio State has. Clemson and Alabama have played twice as many games. Texas A&M, Florida have played twice as many games as Ohio State has now. They put themselves in jeopardy in that regard by playing games. So I can understand some of the argument that, even if Ohio State is 6-0, 5-0, and the other teams have played twice as many games, one way or the other, that you could take that into account. I mean, I've
got no problem with that, Tim, and I completely understand what you're saying. My only point was that this committee has already said with 4 games that it was giving Ohio State a pass on the eye test, and that part I don't see how that could change.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That's why I said Tuesday. The way they rank the teams on Tuesday, I think, is going to be interesting to see if they stick with that.
Agreed. Yep.
But there comes a time when you got to play some games. You've either got to rack up a championship or get 6 or 7 games, like Jack Ebling and I talk about later on this podcast. Ohio State versus Wisconsin. If it doesn't qualify for the Big Ten championship game by not having played, the requisite games, Ohio State versus Wisconsin, that'll be an interesting game. That would probably do more for Ohio State than playing a Northwestern that just got beat by Michigan State in a championship game. You follow my drift?
And it would certainly annoy Fox, which has moved the Big Ten championship game and made it a big noon game. I really think, as much as I've tried to point out the ludicrous nature of this minimum game, 6-game minimum, and the tie-breaking process, no one's going to listen to me. And Gene Smith said he wasn't in a hurry at this point to make any call to the Big Ten to change that. Where that's likely to come from is going to be the broadcast partners.
Oh, yeah.
You can't – they're going to sit there and say one loss, maybe Northwestern, and Indiana, which lost to Ohio State, that's the big noon Big Ten championship game. I don't think so. We want Ohio State, undefeated Ohio State, playing to get into the playoff, defending their 3 conference championships in a row, the biggest draw in the league and the best team.
With Justin Fields.
Yeah. Do not do this. And they, as soon as they say that, I think that the 6-game minimum will disappear. And it also makes sense why it should. The league obviously recognized that there were going to be unbalanced schedules. That's why they put in the 2 games less if the average drops to 6. Why did you put in the 6? If you knew that it just needed to be 2 games less than the average, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. If Ohio State just needed to get to 5 when everybody else is playing 7, I understand there would be weird tiebreakers or weird things that you had to get into no matter what, and you can't prepare for every amount of chaos. But this doesn't make any sense at all. But this scenario,
that 6 number was their back way of saying they're building in a 2-game buffer. That you could lose 2 games instead of making up those games. If those games don't happen, you're not penalized for it. I mean, it's kind of their backwards way of,
now they are penalizing them because of that.
Yeah.
And that's,
they left a little mouse hole instead of leaving a door in the corner they painted themselves into. They left a mouse hole,
right.
And they will have to revisit that and try to wiggle through that mouse. But you're right. I mean, that's what Jack and I talk about in a little while. I hate to keep giving away what Jack and I are talking about, but Ohio State, Wisconsin would probably be twice the ratings
without a doubt
of a Big Ten championship game without those 2 teams in it. And that's what you're right. I mean, I really think the network would step in that regard, because this is a season like none other, kind of like the Masters.
The Masters November.
Yeah. Hey, just, you and I both have people we talk to in and around the program and stuff. And it was amazing how the angst ramped up last week as the week went along. And even the football program, with its own Twitter site, tried to put out encouraging messages with pictures of guys enjoying practice, like on Wednesday, and enjoying Thanksgiving dinner on Thursday together in a wide open Woody Hayes Athletic Center / cafeteria. I don't know. Well, as you look back on it now, when do you think they knew pretty sure that they weren't going to get to play on Saturday? I'm getting the impression that was more like around Thursday than it was Friday. And what's just your take on that? I know it's a moot at this point, except, you know, you never like to feel sort of bamboozled. You know what I mean?
I think that you could see the percentage slipping away by Thursday, but there was still that possibility that they were grasping to as they headed into make double checks and PCR tests and throw them all out there on Friday to make sure they were comfortable. When you commit to moving the flight to Saturday so that you don't have to fly on Friday and you don't have that hotel room, that to me was like, all right, they're still acting as if that game is going to be played, but there's no way that they really intend on flying out at 8:30 in the morning, going straight to the stadium, and then flying home. If the health and safety of your team, which again has been the top priority for the Buckeyes all along, I just that's too much to ask of them to do, to fly out on the day of the game and come home. You can't do it. And
you know what vision popped into my head is those often told tale of Woody Hayes taking his team out for the Rose Bowl, the 1970 season, and he's promised him he's going to go a little bit easier on them when they get out there and stuff. And then they're on the plane, and about an hour out, they announce on the airplane they're going to start taping up everybody's ankles on the plane.
Right.
Because they're going to go straight from the plane to practice. You know what I mean? And just conjuring, in my head, these visions of these guys getting taped up on the airplane on Saturday morning, because, there's not a whole lot of time. If you leave at 8:30, you land at 9:15. I'm talking about wheels up at 8:30.
Yeah.
You land at 9 o'clock, 9:15. You go straight to the stadium. The way these pregame rituals go, there's not a lot of time in there to waste, and that's what I was envisioning was that kind of trip for them. But you're right. That was probably wasn't going to be played when they announced that on Friday.
Yeah, and that's Berm and I had kind of waited as long as possible before hitting the road, but still didn't work out. That's the way it goes. You have to be prepared to cover the game. We didn't want to drive out on the morning because we didn't have a private jet to go over to Champaign. But I wouldn't say that we were surprised about that. It just seemed like at least by Friday, when they confirmed Ryan Day's positive test and say they're going to fly out on Saturday, all of that, flashed warning signs. If it got to the top level with the coach and they were, scrambling, canceling hotel rooms and trying to come up with a plan for one day out and in, that's when it was like, okay, they hadn't even got the final test back, but they seemed to know what the inevitable outcome was going to be at that point.
You guys actually got to Champaign, though, didn't you? Didn't you get to Champaign-Urbana, the Champaign-Urbana Metroplex?
We sure did. We got to go check into our hotel, and couldn't get any. There was no dine-in anywhere, so
yeah,
we weren't able to get pizza delivered at the spot we were at. So just had some Taco Bell. We had loaded up on some supplies to drink when we got to the hotel room before we departed. Also, beat veteran Kevin Noon had picked me up some soda pops from Champagne establishments that I bought out of the back of his car. And
there you go.
Then Berman and I, shot our video, wrote some stuff, just spent the night in that hotel room, got right back on the highway. Never saw, the stadium or anything else there. Or, that'll be for next time. The weather there on Saturday morning, though, Tim, was amazing.
Dude, late November in Illinois, I'm sitting here in Columbus, and I'm just going, this is the most perfect football Saturday in late November. In the olden times, this would have been the week of the game that last week was. It would have been the most perfect setting for Ohio State, Michigan ever. It was beautiful. And like Ryan Day was referring to back in September, all those great weekend days. I don't know if you remember, but almost every Saturday was a picture-perfect postcard football Saturday, and they were going by the wayside while the Big Ten waited to open the season, later rather than never.
Right.
It's just crazy. Hey, last thing. By the way, you just saw what you witnessed there on the road was a post-apocalyptic football situation. I mean, who knows when this thing's going away? Thank goodness there are vaccines being developed as we speak. Just one quick thing. How do you think Ohio State will be ready? How do you think they will be equipped to go on the road for Michigan State on Saturday, if in fact the game happens, possibly missing a couple of its assistant coaches and Ryan Day, with Larry Johnson large and in charge? I mean, like I said, we discussed that last week. I just think, he will handle that problem, that situation with aplomb, because I think he's been a head coach in waiting for too long. But how do you think that'll go down, man? If you're missing couple of 3 starters and your head coach, et cetera, what do you think the setting will be like?
I think that there is such a wide talent disparity between the two that I don't imagine, if they're ready to go, if they're 65, 70, 75, however many. Ohio State's roster, you mentioned it earlier on, that the second and third team is still more than talented enough to cruise past Michigan State, which is just not very good. It's remarkable that they've been able to come up with the 2 wins that they have, those upsets. They've alternated that with looking absolutely terrible. So, but the most interesting part to me is not necessarily game day mechanics or coaching staff or Larry Johnson. This routine that we've talked about so much, Ohio State is so far off kilter on that, and they haven't, had a fully padded practice since last Tuesday. We're not sure when exactly they're going to get one this week. If they go from Tuesday to this Thursday, for example, and have one padded practice and just a bunch of walkthroughs and going against trash cans, are they going to be in that kind of game shape that you need to be for the, last couple of weeks of a Big Ten schedule? You got to trust on that training. You know that Mickey Marotti is doing everything possible when they're allowed in the facility, when they're doing stuff to make sure their bodies are right. But as we've said a number of times, the only way to prepare to play this game is by playing the game. You get better as the season goes on.
Yeah,
you have to have those live reps, and Ohio State has had very few of them this year. Not just practice, but only 4 games, and that's I think that's the biggest question for me.
Yeah, as you were talking there about the routine, I paraphrase the late Bo Schembechler. It's the routine, the routine. I mean, that literally what makes your team, man. And we'll see where it goes. You know what? Let's break right here. I'm going to introduce my my interview with Jack Ebling. We'll come back with some final thoughts. But like I said, Jack Ebling's one of my favorite people out there. He and I have known each other for 40 years. And he's a veteran when it comes to these kind of situations. And, of course, covering Michigan State in particular, but the state of Michigan in general, he has some interesting thoughts, about those 2 programs, especially what's going on in Ann Arbor and what might be going on in Ann Arbor when this season is done. But, let's listen to Jack here for a minute. We'll be back with some final thoughts. As promised, ladies and gentlemen, a command performance, return performance by one of my good friends in the business, Jack Ebling. Jack, welcome to the Tim May podcast again.
Hey, Tim, how are you? I hope you're staying COVID-free.
I am staying COVID-free so far, brother. How about yourself?
Yeah, so far. Free and out of jail. That's good.
You and I are in that critical demographic. We got to stay COVID-free. You know what I'm saying?
That's right. You could tell from the hair and beard color.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of sunrises. Well, I haven't seen that many sunrises. I've seen a lot of sunsets. Let's put it that way.
We've seen sunrises, but we haven't been to bed yet.
Exactly. Yeah, I've never been to Spain either. But that's another story. Just give us a quick update. Ohio State is, as you and I record this, is proposed to try to play a game at Michigan State this week. And I'm just wondering, from your vantage point, you have that great radio show. Plug your radio show. What station are you on? What time are you on? But real quick.
We're on the Spotlight Radio Network from 3 to 6, and it's The Drive with Jack Ebling. And occasionally we're lucky enough to have guests like Tim May, as we will this afternoon.
Yeah, there you go. A ratings boost, ladies and gentlemen. I'm most known as a ratings pumper, but I digress. What is your view from 200 miles away, so to speak, as the crow flies, of what's going on with Ohio State from the standpoint of, number one, how stunned are you that Ohio State has still only played 4 games? And number two, for your, you've been a long time, many time award winning journalist, et cetera, who's kept up with college football as well as anybody, along with college basketball. I'll throw that in there for sure. But how is this affecting, you think, their reputation more than anything else with the college football playoff? And it's their viability for still getting in it if in fact they have to miss maybe another game. Go ahead.
Well, first of all, nothing shocks me in 2020, but Ohio State shouldn't be held responsible for what happened in the Maryland week. That had nothing to do with them, and really shouldn't be held responsible for what happened last week. And I think if the Buckeyes do miss one more game and get healthy and come back and pound Michigan, as I fully expect they will, and then in the crossover week, let's say they can't play in the Big Ten championship game, but they play Wisconsin in a pretty appealing matchup. They could win that and have 6 victories. 6-0 Ohio State, to me, would be better than an undefeated Cincinnati team. And I would look at Ohio State very favorably.
Yeah, that's interesting because I bet way back when I said if Ohio State could just get to 7-0, this was like, before the season started. Yeah, I thought Ohio State would be in the college football playoff. Now I think that's a floating number because of you look around the country, games are being postponed or canceled all over the place.
Right.
You saw Nick Saban have to miss his game last week with Alabama, and you never know when you're not going to get a knock on the door. You know what I mean? Yeah. When COVID enters your building, it's just going to show up on testing. And you're right. I mean, as vigilant as you can be, and I would be surprised if anybody's been as vigilant as Ohio State. There still has to be some luck involved, and that's what we're talking about, right? A little bit.
Yeah, and I kind of think it's cool that you could have Indiana and Northwestern play for a Big Ten championship at Lucas Oil Stadium and have Ohio State in the CFP.
Yeah. Yeah, there you go, and play in Wisconsin on the same day.
Yeah,
they've already announced that the Big Ten championship game has been moved to noon. On that Saturday. Yeah, maybe they put Ohio State and Wisconsin in at prime time. Maybe Fox is already thinking ahead on this. What do you think, Jack?
Well, follow the money, and it looks like that's a ratings winner. I could certainly see a big audience for Ohio State, Wisconsin. Still shocked that Wisconsin lost 17-7 to Northwestern. That was not the Northwestern team I saw Saturday in Spartan Stadium, but I think the Ohio State-Indiana game you saw was very competitive. Indiana probably deserves a shot in a game like this, and it might be a win-win.
Yeah, there you go. And of course, I
just hope Ohio State is healthy. I want the Buckeyes to be 100% for the Michigan game and beyond. And hey, if they come to East Lansing and play, I'm sure they'll put up a great effort, regardless of who they have in uniform. A week ago, someone told me, hey, they could have walk-ons and red shirts and managers and beat Michigan State. But the Spartan team we saw last week, that wouldn't be the case.
Well, that's a nice segue because, anybody who presupposes that your backups, I mean, I just remember when the Alabama backups went in against Missouri way back in the opening game of the season, I think they were shut out and Missouri actually scored points. You see what I'm saying? I think never take anyone's first team lightly is the way I look at it. And Michigan State, my goodness, if Michigan State could just hang on to the football 3 consecutive possessions, Rocky Fumbleitis Lombardi or whatever you want to call him. I mean, he's pretty good on occasion and occasionally he gives the ball to the other team. But, just give me the Mel Tucker first year, et cetera. Give me an update right now or a report card on Michigan State and what Ohio State could be running into on Saturday.
Well, this did not surprise me. A lot of things surprised me and a lot of things have surprised me, but this season hasn't been one of them. He was hired February 12th, spent that month hiring a staff, wearing a lot of name tags around the football building, no spring practice, didn't have any of his own players, came in, no quarterback, had 8 new starters on defense, had 3 workouts before the rug was pulled, then decided, okay, well, we're not going to have fall football, so Unlike Michigan that kept working out, they said, we're going to go to the weight room. We're going to try to get as strong as at least some of the teams in the Big Ten. And then they found out they were playing again. So it didn't surprise me that they had a slow adjustment. I didn't expect 7 turnovers against Rutgers. But the second week, they went to Ann Arbor and beat what was at that time, considered to be a decent Michigan team that had just pounded Minnesota. We didn't know what Minnesota was all about then either.
Yeah.
And then they went to Iowa, and the Iowa team that was 0-2 at the start of the season lost those games by a combined 5 points, took out their frustrations on Michigan State. I think the Iowa Lions are pretty good. That's a team that is going to get better. And then they played Indiana and fell behind early. Again, lack of ball security. But they played even no points in the second half. And shutting out Indiana in a half is not easy.
Right.
So you could see something coming. And then after the Indiana game, I said, well, I think they have a chance to show something against Maryland. Instead, they had a week off, and they used that time to get healthy and prepare for Northwestern. And it showed from the second series of the game.
Absolutely. I mean, that was no fluke on Saturday. I mean, they beat the best team in the West possibly on Saturday. Yeah. And like I said, you take any team lightly at your own peril, the way I look at it, and like I've explained to people, the term I'm using, the Big Ten East, if you take Ohio State off the top of it, which it kind of still sort of is, because it still has 0 in the loss column, the Big Ten East is upside down. Isn't that crazy? I mean, isn't it crazy? I mean, in our lifetime, the closest we've seen to something like this, you and I might have been in 87, 88, when Indiana was pretty good back then, 87 when they beat Ohio State and Michigan in the same year.
Right.
But even Rutgers, there's a spark to Rutgers that was not there a year ago, the last several years. What do you think's behind all this? Is it just the craziness of the year?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with leadership, Tim. With Indiana, Tim Allen's done a great job, I think, of getting those guys to play a style that they can win with. They've got a quarterback who's electric. They've got 2 really good receivers, pretty good running back, but their defense is better than people think. Now, Ohio State's going to put up points on almost anybody, but I think this Indiana defense is a little better than anyone imagined it would be. And I think whenever you talk about these teams and leadership, it starts at the top, and the 2 teams you mentioned, that's a perfect example.
Yeah, Greg Schiano. I mean, Greg Schiano was almost tailor-made to be Rutgers head coach, if you follow my drift.
Yeah.
I mean, I think he's a better head coach than he is an assistant coach in some respects. But you're right. I mean, the bottom line is, you're not just going to go in there and just knock them out of the way as in the old days. In defense, you're right. I mean, Indiana plays this just wild. They know they're going to give up some yards, and they just come after you, and try to force turnovers, et cetera. You look at their pick. I think they've got 16 or 17 interceptions now. That's crazy. That's crazy. And they played their game against Ohio State and were in the game. Yeah, they were down 35-7, didn't quit. Great passing attack and smooth over a lot of warts, and that's exactly what they did. And Rutgers, if they could get just a little more offense, who knows? But you're right. Now I'm looking at the Big Ten West. In the Big Ten West, when Wisconsin played at Northwestern, obviously Wisconsin didn't have quite a few of its starters because they were still in that, that ridiculous 21-day Big Ten protocol, so to speak, for people who tested positive. So, they're a better team than they showed against Northwestern. But I want to get your take. What do you think? You and I was on your program, your highly heralded, award-winning radio show way back when, when we were talking about the Big Ten and the rules it came up with, et cetera, just to play. As you look back on it now, how do you think that's played out? I mean, what would you have changed what of the million things you would have changed? What would you have changed the most about the way the Big Ten set up its protocols, et cetera, to get a season in?
Well, the consistency and communication left a lot to be desired. As far as the actual dates, times, those kinds of things. I think the Big Ten was always going to err on the side of caution. We can say 21 days is a week, 10 days too much. I hope in the long run, it's proven that the Big Ten had a reason for doing what it did, and it's wise. And I can still see how with that, let's say a healthy Ohio State is ready to compete and win college football playoff, which would not surprise me. Maybe we'll look back on this and we say, maybe erring on the side of caution turned out to be a better thing. I'm seeing a lot of programs be ravaged by this, and somebody's going to be smart at the end of the day, the last one standing.
Yeah. The thing I would have changed would have been the 21, only because they built in 7 days, from when you're first detected of having it, 7 to 10 days, because that's how long it takes the pandemic to run its course, the COVID-19. Right. And then, but they built in this next 7 days to determine whether or not you have myocarditis, any kind of inflammation of the heart from it. And then they built in another 7 for you to get to do calisthenics again and get ready to play football. And that's the part I think I could have shortened, granted that you've got to be checked out for the myocarditis thing. I give it up to them on that, but there have been so few, I think, cases of that popping up across the country, at least based on anecdotal evidence that you've gotten from different places. But it's neither here nor there. Where I fault them was they had a perfect schedule set up, 10 games over 14 weeks, all this buffer built in, playing the championship game on December the 19th. And, it's too late to change any of that now, but that's where they had it all set up, and then they backed off from that and then came back with a paint yourself in a corner situation of 8 games in 8 weeks and a plus game. That's what I have problems with. And, even Michigan State's had to miss a game because of somebody else's fault. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And then
absolutely.
The 6-game minimum to play in the Big Ten championship game too. I understand that, but then I don't, because, it penalizes a team for something it may not be its fault. And by its fault, even like you pointed out, just because you have an outbreak of COVID-19 doesn't mean people haven't been fairly vigilant. Ohio State's been as vigilant as anybody. It's still in the back door, And,
and I don't know when you knew that we were going to have fall football. Probably before we did here. The feeling was that it probably was not going to happen for a long period of time. And it took the 21-day period, and it took some other safeguards that we may look at now and say, well, that wasn't necessary to get the votes to change this. This was not an automatic thing. And it took a little persuasion, and that was one of the key concessions to make it happen. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Health and safety. That's what they were leaning on. And, anybody can sit back like you and I are doing, or at least I'm doing. You seem to have come to grips with it, but sit back and especially in 2020 hindsight and look at things. I was saying what I'm saying before the season started. So I had no problem. I was on your show. I was getting apples and rotten bananas thrown at me by your fans, but I just kept talking. Hey, real quick, I used to sit and watch video occasionally with Mel Tucker.
Yeah.
Got to hang out with Mel Tucker a lot when he was at Ohio State.
Yeah.
I've always liked him. I told you I liked him when I was on your show. I thought he had the ability to take Michigan State in a different direction. For example, when it comes to recruiting and things like that. Just what's your take on him now? 10 months into his tenure as the Michigan State coach. Obviously, like you said, he got a late start, then got shoved into the corner with the COVID-19 situation. But just what's your take on Mel?
Well, he was dealt an impossible hand, but I think he's played it about as well as you could. And I've had some Michigan fans the last week say, your program might be in better shape than Michigan's is right now. And people aren't very happy with that situation. So I think what Tucker has done in terms of recruiting, in terms of motivating, he's talked about compete to play, compete to stay, and he's got guys understanding now that there are no guarantees. They're pretty much going to be what they make themselves. And I think they have a chance to continue to improve. If Ohio State can send any kind of a representative team here, I wouldn't expect the Spartans to win this week, but they get Penn State, and who knows what happens in a crossover game. And I think if you had told people at the beginning of the season that this Michigan State team could win 4 games and beat a couple of ranked teams, they'd say, where do we sign up?
Yeah. All right. Now, you live in the heart of Michigan, in the heart of is that a catcher's mitt or is that a first baseman's glove? I'm trying to remember.
Yeah, it's kind of a first baseman's glove, but we're right there in the pocket of it.
Yeah, you're in the pocket of the first baseman's glove. And the high hard one, the high heat is being down in that lower level there. In Ann Arbor, trying to get in the strike zone. It is Ann Arbor right now.
Right.
Jack, you've been around this longer than even I have. What's your take on what's going on in Ann Arbor? And, people keep asking me, like I'm an expert on Ann Arbor and Michigan and Jim Harbaugh, but what happens after this season? I mean, do you, if you're a college administrator, do you understand that if you look around the country, this has been a weird year.
Yeah.
Do you just let it slide, move on to another year? Well, what happens, do you think, with all of the hue and cry going on? I think even within the Michigan program, so to speak, what happens with Jim Harbaugh after this season?
Well, this isn't all COVID related. The problems he hasn't been upset 3 times as a double-digit favorite by Michigan State because of COVID. He hasn't lost 3 games to Penn State because of COVID. He's not going to be 0-6 against Ohio State shortly because of COVID. He's not going to be 1-4 in bowl games because of COVID. So if he wants to use that excuse, look at his post-game press conferences, watch his teams on the sideline, the lack of enthusiasm, the lack of effort, extremely rare. You just don't associate it with the Michigan program. And I told someone at the beginning of the year that if you offered me my choice of coaches in the Big Ten, 1 through 14, I would rank Jim Harbaugh 13th or 14th. And I'm going to hold to that. Yeah.
Hey, who would be the other guy you're flipping there with him, 13th or 14th? Let's get it out there.
Well, I haven't seen anything out of Scott Frost. Maybe it's something about the prodigal son quarterbacks.
Yeah.
Lovie Smith certainly has had issues, but hasn't had much to work with. But I think Scott Frost has been given everything he needs to win. Certainly, if he asks for it, he's going to get it. Yeah. And Michigan, the same deal. They have every conceivable resource and advantage except wins.
Yeah. Well, you saw where Nebraska's pushed back the start date on building their new, I think it's their new football facility, et cetera. I'm not sure if it's lack of fundraising or what, but we all know, man, money talks and proposed winning seasons walk. I mean, in this deal, hey, the other thing, the guy who's been sort of overshadowed in the hot seat category because of Jim Harbaugh and his ability to attract lightning is James Franklin. I mean, I think that was a big win for him on Saturday, but that's just their first win of the year, Jack. I mean, we're talking about Penn State. I mean, I know the COVID-19 challenge. I know this, that, and the other, but that's crazy, isn't it?
It is. And when you think that Michigan has been playing football since 1881 and taught Notre Dame how to play. So they've been in this a long time. And this is the first time that the Wolverines have ever lost to a team that's 0-5 or worse. Ever.
That's crazy. So real quick, let me just get your take on, I mean, will there be a different coach at Michigan, you think, next year as you and I sit here and get ready to preview the Michigan State game a year from now? Will there be a different coach at Ann Arbor? What's your take?
I think there's a good chance there will be. Certainly the alumni, the fan base want that to happen. I think there's a GoFundMe campaign in Columbus and East Lansing to keep him there. They would love nothing better, Michigan State and Ohio State, than to keep Jim Harbaugh around. Yeah. I know that a lot of Buckeyes, as much as they hate Michigan, during that week. They like Michigan to be good because otherwise it flattens out that last week of the season, devalues it. Those gold pants that everybody seems to have in Columbus, they lose their value.
Yeah.
But I would think
I see where you went there, man. That was a good shot into the past, but go ahead there. How much are you taking? How much you give me for these gold pants? Not as much as last year. Go ahead now.
I mean, you could say you couldn't even get a good tattoo for 4 sets of pants.
There you go. I knew that was coming, but you're right.
So,
it does. It devalues everything that Michigan's part of, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I mean,
exactly.
The Big Ten. Yeah.
And and we feel that around here that people said, hey, anytime you beat Michigan, that's an accomplishment. But you say that and people say, well, that doesn't mean anything. That team isn't worth anything.
Yeah.
So I would expect there's going to be a lot of pressure on Ward Manuel. The deal is that Harbaugh and the university president, Mark Schlissel, haven't been seeing eye to eye. And now there's a vote of no confidence for the university president. So who knows what's going to happen in Ann Arbor? They have some very tough decisions to make. And whether Jim Harbaugh would move on to pro football, certainly there are some teams, some franchises, I'm sure, think that, hey, he did it with the 49ers. He can do it here. And he might have a chance to go back and try that. Yeah.
Well, the great thing about pro football is you draft and or sign off free agency your players, and you can replace people at the snap of a finger. The problem that everybody's looked at about Michigan since he's been there, they've really never developed a quarterback. I think this McNamara kid has some promise, though. I like what he brings, but it's just all these things that you thought were coming through the door when Jim Harbaugh moved in have not come to fruition, and it's hard. Hey, last thing before you go, as you look at Ohio State from afar, what is it that impresses you the most? If in fact they can make it to Michigan State this week with any kind of semblance of a full complement team, and there will be, I would think there would be some starters missing based on what you're hearing, scuttlebutt, et cetera. Ohio State rarely announces anything of substance to us, including even the numbers of COVID-19 situation going on within their program. But what impresses you most about this Ohio State football team as you've looked at it from afar?
Well, the talent, the depth, the recruiting ability, the coast-to-coast appeal of the brand, the program, the leadership. It's hard not to be impressed by everything about Ohio State football these days. And I would think that if they lost 6 starters, they would be as well equipped as any school in the country, including Alabama, to say next, and then bring 6 more guys in you can win with. So a lot of teams would be decimated with the loss of 3 or 4 key players. Yeah. Ohio State is probably as close to COVID immune, and I don't mean that in terms of the actual illness. I mean in terms of putting up a competitive team as any school in the country.
And is this as like you said, the coast to coast brand? Yeah. Is this as good as it's ever been for Ohio State from your vantage point? You go back, you go back to the Woody Hayes days. I mean, Duffy Daugherty. I mean, all those days. You go back almost that far. I mean, that far. But is this as good as it's been from your vantage point?
I think it's as good as it's been, or better than for any Big Ten team, any school. I would say when you can go down to Texas and you can get 5-star after 5-star. Some of these guys haven't even seen the field yet. You can go out to the state of Washington and guys who are considered to be in the top 10 out there, and they've got Ohio State on top of their list. Really, it's no bounds. It's not a matter of putting a fence around the state of Ohio or staying in the Midwest. Ohio State has national, international appeal. So with the program, with the results, I always tell people when they say, well, look at Ohio State recruit, I said, put yourself in that position. If Ohio State comes to you and offers you a scholarship, what's the problem? You don't like the traffic pattern on campus?
Yeah. The Oval can be pretty big. And now what we're finding out is everybody can take online courses. You don't even have to go to the Oval, right?
Yeah.
Hey, how much?
Although I'm hearing from Michigan that, that's a big advantage. That's one of the reasons that Ohio State can do things that, the Harvard of the Midwest can't.
Yeah, the Harvard of the Midwest, exactly. Last thing, how long will it take can anybody in the Big Ten catch up to Ohio State in that regard? Not that they can't beat them on occasion. We've seen Purdue and Iowa do that.
Right.
You know?
Right.
but can teams is this a race that's going to that people are going to be playing catch up to for quite a while? What's your take on that?
Yeah, I don't see anything changing. I think Ohio State would have to do something self-destructive. Now, schools can make progress. They can climb. They can get better. Yeah. But Michigan State in the last decade, I believe, is the only school that's beaten Ohio State 3 times.
Yeah.
And, for that to happen, and I think there were a couple of other games in 2012 and 2016 that the Buckeyes won by 1 point. Yeah. So when Michigan State's been competitive, they've been right there with Ohio State. And if you look at the programs, I don't think they're that close. So, when you talk about Ohio State versus Purdue or Ohio State versus Illinois or Ohio State versus Maryland, there are probably 8 to 10 teams in the Big Ten that they don't have players that Ohio State would have had in for visits.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, you could take Ohio State's recruiting class, and almost any player on that list would be the top recruit at other Big Ten programs. So you got to figure out a way how to beat those guys with players that they didn't want.
I like, though, how you dovetail the end of this conversation into the fact that Michigan State's been the more successful against Ohio State over the last 10 years. That was excellent journalistic prowess on your part. Hey, Jack, have a good time at the dentist, man. Thank you for coming on the Tim May podcast again.
Well, it's always a pleasure, and look forward to having you on the drive with Jack this afternoon at 4:30, and fans of Tim May can hear that on the Spotlight Radio Network.
Yeah, all 3 of them can tune in. You got it. Hey, Jack, appreciate it, man.
All right, take care. Have a good day, Tim.
You too, man. Yeah, Austin, you know of Jack Ebling. I mean, he's got a great reputation across the country of being an insightful young man when it comes to Big Ten football in general and Michigan State in particular. And, those are interesting thoughts. Michigan's at a crossroads. University of Michigan's at a crossroads, I think, with his head coach. And Michigan State, just when everybody was writing off Mel Tucker in Michigan State, they pulled these couple of upsets. It's an interesting year in the Big Ten, right?
Always is. It's been – no one could have predicted anything that's happened here with Penn State, Michigan State, even the rise of Indiana. It's been a crazy year, and I'm afraid that there's more craziness on the way.
That's what I was going to ask you. Last thing, your prediction, and this we try to keep this podcast sort of like timeless to a certain extent, but it's the time capsule more than timeless. But does Ohio State get its game in with Michigan State on Saturday? And does it end up with the requisite games to play in the Big Ten championship game? Your prediction as we speak.
I think they'll pull it off. I think they'll get to play Saturday. Again, though, the part of this that, Tim, I don't want to go off on too far of a tangent. You have to rely on the other teams as well, and that's the biggest X factor. We've already seen that with Maryland, and you don't know what's going to happen with Michigan State. Like, they have to handle their business too. I guess my prediction is that Ohio State has probably got their hands around their situation and should be ready to play on Saturday, but that's not the only factor here. And I've almost had to give up on that part of it. Like, the virus is unpredictable, and I'm done trying.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You could get the 6-0, and then all of a sudden the team you're going to play in the Big Ten championship game can't play. You know, I mean, what do you do then? Do you reschedule? Do you throw another team into the Big Ten championship game? You know what I mean? Et cetera. I mean, this is far from over, ladies and gentlemen. But as usual, I thank my buddy, awesome, you know him as Austin Ward, for joining me on the Tim May podcast. We'll be back again next week to chop up what happened, to chop up what might be coming down the road. It's supposed to be the game week. We'll see if it is. But until then, this is Tim May for Awesome Ward. We'll see you then.